Hello, everyone. Hi, Madeline from Dribble here. How is it going? It's great to see so many of you guys in the chat. I'd love to hear whereabouts in the world you're joining from. I'm joining from England at the moment, 6 p.m. here. I would love to hear what sort of time it is for you guys. We've got some guys from India, Pakistan, Brazil, 1 p.m. from Washington, D.C., a real international bunch. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to have an awesome session with Jessica Coe, all about building design teams for first-time managers and founders. Who's been to a Dribble event before? We run these quite regularly. Or if this is your first time, you've got Lynette from Santa Monica. First time for Brian as well. A lot of first timers. Okay, so I'm going to do a bit of housekeeping before we get started, and then we'll get Jessica Coe up here to kick off this live and interactive workshop. A few things to be aware of. This session will be interactive. We're going to have a presentation, but then also a lot of Q&A. So if you have questions that you want to ask Jessica, just pop them in the question and answer panel of the chat. You'll see a Q&A panel. Put your questions in there. Don't put them in the chat because they might get lost. Pop them in the Q&A and then upvote other people's questions. So you'll see the ability to click a plus next to people's questions. When you click the plus, that means that you like that question, you want it to get answered, and it will rise to the top of the question and answer pile. There is also an opportunity for you guys to come up on stage and ask Jessica a question face to face with your sound on and microphone on. Don't be shy when this happens. All you need to do is raise your hand in the question and answer panel of the chat. Raising your hand means that I want to come up on stage, I want my camera on, I want my microphone on, and we will get you on stage. I've seen in the chat a couple of questions about this being recorded. Yes, this is being recorded. We are going to send you the link to the recording after this session. I should at this moment also say hello to everyone joining on YouTube as well. Thanks for joining us on YouTube. Along with the recording of the session, we'll send around the slides that Jessica is walking through today. So don't feel like you're going to miss anything if you get up to stretch your legs or grab a glass of water. We'd love to see how you are watching this. If you're sharing this on social media, tag us at Dribble. That's always fun to see how you guys are watching this. Okay, that's it for housekeeping notes. I'm going to be here the whole time. If you have any technical questions, if you have any questions about this workshop, just feel free to DM me and we will get your questions answered. So in this workshop, Jessica's going to share her insights and experience from her career building design teams. Topics that are going to be covered are going to be like how to identify different types of designers, how to know who's right for your team and company, and hiring mistakes that she personally has made as a first-time manager. A lot of you probably know Jessica Coe, but she is a good friend of Dribbles. She is the co-founder and CEO of Playbook.com, a $20 million vision cloud storage startup in San Francisco. She was part of Google's early design team in 2007, and she was responsible for working on products like Google Drive, Hangout, and YouTube. And she's interviewed, reviewed, and hired hundreds of designers. Yes, I see a clap hands in the chat. She was also the first and head designer of Opendoor, overseeing a multi-billion-dollar company's product and brand design. So you guys are in really, really great hands. And without further ado, I will get Jessica on stage to take it away.
Hi. Hello, everyone. It's so nice to be here. I think this is my fourth, or I can't remember, but with Dribble team. So yeah, it's just so exciting. Every single time, it's very exciting to be here. Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm calling from San Francisco in California, USA. So yeah, a little bit of my background. That I am currently the CEO and co-founder of Playbook.com. It's a visual design in cloud storage for designers. Everyone gets 4 terabytes if you're a creative. So, if you haven't, I would just, highly recommend you sign up today. It might go away. That promo might go away soon. So, but previously I was a head of design at Opendoor. I built the whole team from scratch. From product design, I was overseeing product design and brand design and some part of marketing as well. And then previously, I was at Google when it was just like 100 people design team. Now it's, probably tens of thousands designers now. But it was when it was a one unit design team at Google. I was working on Google Drive, Google Apps, Enterprise, YouTube, and things like that. So I've been a designer for about 15 years. I've been hiring a lot of designers, seen a lot of designers. So hopefully you will take away something from this workshop. Is how to become the first time manager. How do you identify different designers? How do you manage designers? So all those stuff, the management side of things. With that, I'm just kind of curious who am I talking to? Can we do a poll where we can get everyone's backgrounds? Everyone click on the poll there. Oh, cool. Very cool. Manager, founder, designers. I've seen people go switch back and forth, manager and designer, IC and manager, especially in design industry. That's very common. Awesome. This is cool. So the people who are coming in as designers, they're anticipating eventually they will probably want to manage a team of designers, and how do I prepare myself for it? Actually, designer manager here. Yeah, cool. All right, so okay, let's get started. I would like to I my favorite part of this workshop is always Q&A, so I'm going to spend a lot of time answering questions. So if you can actually post your questions in Q&A section, that'd be great. But with that, I'll probably spend about 20 minutes in the beginning just to just kind of start a conversation. Maybe I'll start a topic, and then maybe you'll have a lot of questions around that too. So let's do that. Let me present, and you'll have the slides afterwards. Can you see my screen? And say yes. Okay. All right. So yeah, I'm just gonna spend about 15 minutes. What I've learned, all that stuff, like I learned as a first-time manager, and hopefully you'll take away some things from this. So yeah, how to identify different types of designers. I get asked a lot of this question from non-designers, non-design founders also. It's like, how do I know which designers to look for? And that is number one question I always get. So that was wanted to talk about that the first, as the first item today. Number two, how to know who's right for your team and company. And then number three, just general hiring tips. And then number four, lessons I personally learned as a first-time manager. Some takeaways there. So how to identify different types of designers. And this is based on my personal experience of just observing and working with a lot of designers and also managing a lot of designers. There's a spectrum of design skills. Not many people know this. Like non-designers will ever be in our space long enough to understand this at this level. The subtlety of our roles in the company. So generally, when we think of a designer, product designer as a UX designer, visual designer, there's really just like this visual. There are really three parts: visual, engineering in the sense of like technical, and then there's UX right in the middle. Um, Visual and engineering are hard skills. Engineering also includes process, research, all of that analytical stuff that synthesizing research. And then the visual is hard skills. It's an artifact. You're putting out something out there. And then there's in the middle that's a soft. That's understanding people, understanding psychology of people, understanding why certain UX is great and which is not. So UX is really just like a merge of these two giant fields of visual and engineering. It is right in the middle. And a lot of times when I look at designers, they either come from both like either visual side or engineering side. especially new grads. If new grads are coming into the industry, they have a peak in the visual, either visual or peak in the engineering side. And nothing yet in the UX because they haven't kind of developed that people or psychology yet, just yet. Because I think in order to develop that, you have to have some amount of practice and just being in the industry for a long time and trying and observing constantly. So visual people tends to come from agency background and tend to come from art school background and then or graphic design. Engineering tends to have a background of either coming from UX schools, so like actually teaching the technical skills of UX, like going through the process of doing research, or actual engineering coding. So those people also tend to kind of come in from that side. I've also seen architecture people. There's a lot of UX designers come from architect school. So they tend to also come from engineering side of things. And then it sort of kind of merges in the middle in the UX. And what I've observed in the last 10 years or so is that when this is a question I get asked to, how do you know when somebody's senior designer? It tends that peak tends to kind of go, that area start to the area cover is start to become larger. So if you come from a visual side and you are in this industry long enough, you build enough product intuition, you build enough product to understand the patterns, good patterns and bad patterns, it started to kind of develop more cover that kind of UX side or UX thinking side of things, understanding why, and then it kind of start to cover that area. And the same thing is true for engineering as well, start to cover that area. And then once you cover that area, start to go a little into visual side as well. And then visual side tends to go into like working with engineers or starting to kind of develop their own tools, something like that. It's just the amount of skills they cover, it gets larger and larger eventually. This is probably somebody that has about 3, 4, or 5 years experience that would have a graph that looks like this. And of course, whenever we hear about unicorns, this is actually a term that we hear all the time when we're talking to hiring managers, oh, he's a unicorn or she's a unicorn. It's a rare type that tends to have a visual and engineering at the same time. It's a very rare one. So I don't see these types very often, but they do exist. They tend to cover a large area. That when there has to something to give. It's not their peak is not as high as somebody who's like specialized come from each side, but they tend to be a much more generalist. They tend to come and cover all the areas. Those are rare ones. So it's the most important thing about hiring someone for your team is understanding your team and your company. Luckily, I was able to spend a lot of time at Google and spend time in startups, so I understand those kind of differences between the big company and small company design teams. So I was able to kind of sort of observe and then develop some sort of like findings and lessons come from there. This is how it always starts in a startup world. And Google was a startup at some point. It always starts with somebody who's very, very good at visual because there's just a lot of stuff that needs to put out. So website needs to be done, the brand needs to be done. Every single thing requires a higher hard skills list. So whenever designers design something, it goes out the next day. It goes out the week after. It goes to engineering team right away. And then they tend to hire more on the front end development side of things. Again, because they're optimizing for speed, they're optimizing for development. So you get this like two giant peaks at on startup world, and eventually about a year and a half in, they tend to look for somebody who's good at UX. And then they start looking for that senior UX designer that come in and they cover that area. So that's why it's as a startup founder, you're starting to kind of cover the areas that's like missing. And eventually, because that area becomes a larger and larger as the team gets bigger. As head of design, the job is always to up the bar, the quality bar. So not only to cover all the areas that's missing, we're always each new hires will actually cover some areas that your current team is not covering. And of course, as the team gets bigger, you can see that there are more fields to cover. And then the design kind of start to bleed into marketing. Design product design start to bleed into product because there's probably help in the product side of things. There are more product areas to cover. So then that's how the sort of design teams start to form this giant ecosystem. They're covering all their areas at the same time. You're trying to up the quality bar constantly at the same time. You're trying to cover all the product areas. This is the job of head of design in any company. So the hiring tips for based on all this, team dynamic matters and company dynamic matters. It's that I what I've seen so far in a startup world, and this is when a founder comes to me, is like, hey Jessica, it's like, how do I know which startup, which designer is right for our team? And I tend to ask, the first question I always ask is that, how experienced is the PM? Or what's your PM like? Usually that gives me a very good sort of insight as what kind of designers that company needs. Usually a senior PM, just like if they've been in the industry long enough, if anyone is in the industry long enough, they tend to understand the UX, as in they tend to learn a lot about the UX. Then you kind of couple them with a junior designer with a lot of like hustle and hard skills, and they tend to be a much more interesting relationship that could probably the company can take advantage of. And vice versa is a junior PM tends to, you have to couple them with a senior designer, because junior PM comes they're usually hustlers that comes with a lot of energy and just go 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 kind of type mentality, but they don't have that kind of understanding of why, or they don't have understanding of the process of things. So the senior designer comes in and they help this person out. And of course, it's not always the true, because I've seen senior PMs work really well with the senior designers. But a lot of times when someone has a vision already, somebody has like, I already know like process, then it tends to kind of create a lot of conflict when they're both of them are both seniors. So it's dynamic matters quite a bit actually. So it's very important that especially for designers, understanding what kind of person PMs am I going to work for is incredibly important. Company dynamic matters. This is also based on my experience. Startups are really great for people, designers especially, who are 0 to 1. And 0 to 1 means that somebody who's not afraid to start something, like start something new. And they come with a lot of hard skills, and it's very, very fast, and then can work with ambiguity. There's no process at all. This is like whatever you design might go out tomorrow. It's just, it almost feels like a chaos, but there's a lot of people who actually enjoy that kind of chaos. They like the speed of it. They get a lot of dopamine out of that. And there are a lot of designers I've worked with at Google. They're somewhat opposite of it, which is also just as important. They're kind of T-shaped designers. They're generalist. So they can communicate really well, they can manage a relationship really well, but they're also somewhat specialized. So I call them T-shaped designers. They're covering all their areas. They understand the research, they understand the process, but they're specialized in something. Either that be visual, or that be icon making, or that would be prototyping. There's always this like specialty in some of the designers that I worked at Google. And they're usually very interested in it, contributing to design system and process. So larger engines. So if the design team is an engine itself, they like to be a part of it. They want to contribute how to make this engine faster and more, robust. And they work really well with structure. Um, Generally these people tend to be much more like structures, like, okay, the career ladder, okay, I understand what it takes for me to be the next level designer. So those people tend to be pretty comfortable with the structure side of things. So those are kind of the dynamics that why certain designers are better fit for one or the other. So if you're looking for a designer, then most of the time you want to, now that you have kind of understood like what type of designers am I look I now I understand who I'm looking for. You kind of built that persona in your head, the ideal design candidates. And you want to make sure that you spend about 80% of your time going after those LinkedIn, because people get very overwhelmed. Because everyone has that job description as a product designer. It's like, well, who am I going after? It tends to be, you have to look at the background of that person, that, and it has to match your persona, and reserve about 20% of time on the rest of the candidates who are serendipity and who can surprise you. They may not come from the kind of backgrounds that you're expecting, but they come in and with completely surprise you in a different way. So always reserve about 20% of time on those serendipity type of candidates. This is what genuinely, like, this is the advice I always give to founders. And so some, like, I want to end with some of the lessons I learned as the first time manager. I've always, the biggest thing that I learned, a takeaway from recruiting, is that I unconsciously over index on brand name companies on their resume. Um, the rationale behind it, I was thinking back then was like, okay, maybe they must have gone through some sort of, process, interviewing process in a big company. That means that there probably about 7 or 8 people interview them. Then they must be good if they were hired. Based on my experience, that was never ever true. I think it was always 50-50. And the people who don't have that big brand name companies on their resume are just as great designers, if not better. So, and then it's always 50-50. So I think that it it is a completely a bias that we tend to have first time managers, because we don't want to fail as a first time manager hiring the wrong person. So we tend to kind of over index on brand name company, the background of their resume, to see if this person will be their next rock star. So, but it's completely wrong. I think it's completely based on my experience. It's not always true. Um, so yeah, my biggest mistake was I over indexed too much on brand name companies, and I probably going forward will never do that again. Number two is that don't underestimate strong people managers, your lieutenants. So if you become the founding manager, if you become the head of design or design director, you tend to have managers under you that's probably that managing the other parts of different parts of product areas, and they have their own designers. Um, Ideally, I think that naively I was going in, it's like anyone can be in that spot, but not necessarily, not everyone can actually scale up to that level. And that is something I learned the hard way. Because it's hard to actually promote somebody to be at the level and then have to tell that person is like you're not the best fit for that anymore. It's the hardest thing. And also that person feels probably, it probably knows that too, but feels stuck because you know probably that person views this whole, becoming the IC again as a demotion. So I probably put that person in a wrong position myself, and then that person probably felt stuck, and I don't want anyone to feel that way. But I think that would mean that I have to be very, very careful about choosing the right people managers, and then make sure that your design operation can scale. If that person's suffering, that the suffer comes to you. So and you have to manage that stress as well. But if you have the right person, it just works. And then that operation just scales very nicely. So, and that is something that I learned the hard way. The next thing I learned was that my job, I was always becoming a head of design. I didn't know what my goal was. There was a good period of time, 4 or 5 months. I was like, what am I doing? I can't, because when you're an IC, you knew exactly what you're supposed to do. And when you have a small team, you're a manager, you know somewhat what you're supposed to. When you become the head of design, it's like, okay, what's my goal? What's my role? And now I'm looking back, it's like my goal was to increase the quality bar and the scale design operation at the same time. And those two things often conflict each other, because when you're trying to up the quality bar means you introduce a new process into your team, which tends to slow down operation on the rest of the team, which actually tends to kind of create a lot of conflict from the rest of the organization. So you have to, as a head of design, you're constantly juggling the expectation with your team at the same time, the rest of the team. Almost become a politician at the time. It's like, just kind of finding that right balance and trade offs. and then always be extremely communicative. So yeah, that is an incredibly hard job. It was definitely one of the more difficult roles I've ever taken on. Number four is always be on the lookout for new young designers. And I always say this to every head of design, every design manager. Young designers are the best. They bring a lot of energy, high energy and hustle nature, and they want to learn so much and they soak up. They're so malleable. They they would do anything. They would go extra miles to just to learn something. So, and then if you find the right one, if you with the especially with based on the hard skills that you need on your team, you match with the right young designer, it just like explodes. And that person, you just keep grooming them to be the next best. The people tend to not stay in a one company very long these days. It's usually about 2 3 years, and that is like most of the time pretty long for a designer. And then we tend to kind of switch jobs or companies, and by grooming your young designers, that tend to, if they're groomed internally, they tend to kind of last a little longer than if you were to hire somebody that was already, um, you know, mid-level or senior. So there's a lot of benefits of actually looking and then hiring young designers. Also, it's extremely satisfying and to see somebody that grows so fast and so, become really great designers. It's extremely satisfying as managers. So, with that, let me go back and then see if you guys have any questions. Hopefully, that was like a good introduction so they can have a lot of questions about that. The first question. Wait, okay. What are your thoughts? By the way, if you ever want to go on a stage and then talk to me and then ask questions directly, raise your hands anytime. Cool. All right. What are your thoughts on design test in the hiring process? I'm assuming design test is design exercise, right? Um, yeah, there's a lot of debate going on between on Twitter or on LinkedIn whether or not design exercises is the right way to hire people. I this is advice I always give to people is that it works really well for somebody who doesn't have a brand name on their resume. So it works really well for underdog designers. So because it's a chance for them to prove that they're really good. And sometimes design exercise is an opportunity for them to show that they can be really good. Senior design is not necessarily it's like the one of the uh, best things because soft skills you can't really see soft skills through the design exercise. Most of the time, senior designers, it's much better if reference calls usually are much better so representative of their work and previous work. So I think it really depends. That's probably my answer. If you are underdog, if you're a new designer, it's a chance for you to prove to someone that you're really good. For senior designers, it may not necessarily be the best one. So I would try to find different ways to do, um, you know, uh, other than design exercise. If you're a senior designer, okay. How do you create the best design culture? Oh, somebody's on this. Is this Olivia? Oh, I think you're muted. There you go. There you go.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Hello. Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah, loads of questions, but I'll just jump in with one, which is what are your tips for developing designers if you are a non-designer yourself?
Oh, developing designer. So if you're like a founder who's not a designer or something, or you manager who's PM or something, you're managing designers.
Yeah, or just a head of department who is in charge of product and design at the same time.
Yeah, it's really hard. That's like me right now. I'm the CEO. I'm basically managing all parts of departments and engineers as a designer. It is incredibly hard because I mean, to really develop someone, you have to know what they do, and then what is you have to understand the quality so they keep pushing these people, right? Um, so you tend to have to. I tend to rely on somebody who understands that domain really well. So if you have a senior designer on the team and they're a junior designer, there's some kind of hierarchy going on, then you tend to kind of rely on the senior designer to kind of develop that junior designer's skill set. So that would be probably one thing. Another way, if you have just one designer and you're trying to develop that person's skill set, yeah, it's hard. It's like you have to go extra miles to really understand what they do every day and what is the quality bar, and then you have to constantly make connections, talk to people who are designers outside, and then and you have to be sort of that person somewhat. Um, all you have to be is the next level of that person, or at least have that kind of eye for it. So that's why my advice then, again, if you have a senior designer, I would say rely on that person's expertise to kind of groom the junior designers. If not, then you have to rely on an external sort of advisor or somebody who you know outside to kind of develop that relationship.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And thanks for the presentation as well. It was great.
Great. Awesome. That's a great question. All right. Going back to how do you create the best design culture? Um, it's every that's a great question. How do you develop great design culture? Hmm, I think a lot of people would answer this very differently. That's why I have to think about it a little bit. I think uh, design culture, it's not just all happy hour. It's not just all like, Friday, let's have wine and then, build that design culture. It's about people trusting each other. I think trust is probably the one where it comes the most. Trust um comes from a lot of different aspects. It's like I can trust somebody that they will do the job. So as a head of design, that you kind of have to have a bar that everyone has to meet. Otherwise, it's always if always the high performers tend to pick up sort of the slackers to work. So you have to make sure that everyone's sort of equally contributing to, and that you're also rewarding them at the same time. So it comes from this trust, trusting the system. That trusting the system usually means trusting the leadership that they will make the right things. So that's why, I mean, how do we build trust? It's hiring the right people, and then they all can trust each other. They will deliver, and then they can rely on someone else. Also, it's like no one's like really me. It's like everyone's kind of it's a more of a team mentality. It's like I will cover that part that you're not very good at. Everyone feels comfortable talking about their weakness so that other people can pick up if they're willing to. So that kind of stuff. It's this feeling this um com, com, you know feeling comfortable in that they can talk about anything with the team. Those are kind of like a very culture that I would call the best design culture. Okay, next question is a great question. How do you help the communication between designers as the head of design? How do you help the communication between designers? Ooh, that's also this is also a hard one. It's easy to say, but actually to practice it, it actually requires a lot of finesse and work. Um, Generally communications. Okay, so I think process comes to mind. Process should be their last resort. Process is there just to ensure that there's at least basic minimum communication going. Not like if it's already pretty great team, the communication should be flowing no matter what, no matter there's a process or not. But once it starts to break, not because not the people are not liking each other, it's more because there's just more people on the team, then that process kind of ensures that nothing falls through. Um, so My guess is that if communication is, you have to kind of look at as why the communication is failing, or if there are any areas of communication is failing. One area might be the team is now too big. Usually there's a number, there's like a pizza size or something. In Amazon, there's this famous pizza size. If there's one pizza and everyone comes eat and then become full, then that's a good size team. And anything is beyond that, it's too big, and then the communication will start to kind of fall apart. So my guess is about 6 to 7 people. It's okay. The communication still flows, and beyond that, it starts to kind of fall apart. And that's when head of design like kind of comes in and is like, okay, here's what we're going to do to kind of ensure that communication keeps flowing. That usually means like we do a stand up every morning. We do retros every week or something like that, or we have a meeting where we get together. Actually, you ask the right question, it forces the information out of people, that kind of stuff. So as a head of design, like you do have to kind of ensure that the infrastructure and process start to kind of in place. You and then know exactly what the right timing for those things. Hey, that was a great question. The next question is, I'm a founder and designer. I designed um, an application is currently with developers, and next step is to launch. What are the main roles I need to hire for live application? Who should I be on payroll versus contract? Okay. What are the main roles I need to hire for live? So it's like a founder to a founder question. Okay. What sort of main roles I need to hire for live applications? What should I be? Who should be on the payroll versus? It's a great question as an entrepreneur. As a designer, the good thing about you is that you don't need a designer. You don't need to hire a designer on your team to launch a product. You can get a first prototype out, or you can get the first version out pretty quickly if you have the developer help. So then I think you already kind of answer your question is that I have now it is with developers. So your first three hires, there's going to be developers at least. And then who needs to be on payroll? I think you're going to feel this pain as the team grows. Is that contractors tends to requires a lot of management, project management, and it takes a lot of time from you, the designing. So that would mean that you want to have a full time person who's just as invested as you are on the team, so that that person actually teaches or project manages the contractors on the outside. And you're going to see this out of like three contractors you work with, maybe the one person actually steps up to be the project manager, and that person needs to be on the payroll probably, and then the rest of probably can keep them as contractors. Okay. Okay, next question is, for those of us who are new managers have set teams, what rhythms and practice do you suggest for healthy teams? This is hard too, because you know teams already existed before you came, and then now you are the manager. This is probably one of the hardest thing that any managers have to do. Actually, absorbing a existing team and their way of doing things, their old way of doing things. Always this conflict, new versus old. You have to do it very gradually, of course, because I mean, the gentle. You don't rock the boat right away, unless that's what CEO's intention was to rock the boat right away. Then you start hiring your lieutenants and make sure that the lieutenants are you can trust them. They're bought into your vision and your new way of doing things, and then they can start implementing it. Um, Otherwise, you come in, just kind of observe and what they do, and then you try to insert and make some improvements and develop here and there, just very gently, and then see what's working with them, what's not working with them, and then you suggest as a new person. But it has to be very strategic and very gentle at the same time. So that's why it's a hard job. Hey, AJ, in a startup, what level should we expect as an entry level designers? Like more into UX or into UI? Um, Level UX is something that's it requires a bit of an experience. like I said, it's understanding people, it's understanding psychology, understanding the problem space really, really well, your users. So it takes some time. It takes about 2, 3 years to start to kind of really call yourself user experience designer. Um, Usually, person who comes from a visual side of things or engineering side tend to be much more. The gradual transition is going into UI first, and then do the UX. And then you'll probably realize this, not right away. You will realize that you start designing interface, and then when you become the UX designer, you start to really understand why, like why we do this UI, and then you start getting into like arguments with people. You have opinions about things. That's when you know that you're starting to become much more of a UX designer. And usually it takes about 2, 3 years because UI, it takes a lot of UI to understand the UX because you have to put something out there to learn something and then see how people use it, and then you start to develop that intuition, start to develop like opinions about how UX should be. So UI is probably a much more general, generally it's a good way to get into UX. All right, Justin, so if you had the choice, would you build a team of generalists or specialists? That's a great question. If I had a choice, it depends, and I hate to give that answer. I have to deal with this constantly as a CEO. It's like when you start building a startup, all you have is mostly generalist. Um, that's true for engineers too. They call them full stack, and they can pretty much do the front end and the back end, and then anything in between. And then you start to kind of hire specialists because it start to become the system becomes much more complex, and you need somebody to come in and take care of those like things that only specialists can do. um, for design is true actually. When you start building a design team, the second one or third one tends to be a little more. um, Actually, it could be a specialist too, if they have visual design skills. But generally, you expect somebody to kind of pick up it, like divide up the work the same way, hopefully, so that you're not constantly like context switching, and then you're just covering all the areas. You want somebody to be able to have divide of the work so that you don't have to worry about the other side. But I can almost see that if you're very insecure about some areas, like like visual design, for example, then I can almost see that you want to hire a specialist to cover that area. So just to kind of answer that question, then it's almost like you have to understand your weakness, or the fields that you're most insecure about, and then to cover that area, you want to hire somebody who's a little more specialist in the area, to cover that area of insecurity. But if not, you have no insecurity whatsoever, you're like rock star, then you want to almost double yourself. Like you want to hire somebody just as generalist so you can cover the product areas. Um, Most of the time, a lot of people love T-shaped designers. T-shaped means there's specialized um, skill sets, and then at the same time, they can cover a lot of areas because they are very flexible. They can do some amount of degree and do some amount of work in other areas. At the same time, they have a specialized field. So design industry just loves people like that. So your every goal for every designer should be actually become a very good T-shaped designer. Then you become invincible. All right, so next question is based on your experience, any tips on looking out for young talents? Yeah, this is a great question. There's so many ways to look for young talents, and they're all hidden somewhere. It's hard to find them. There's one trick that I did is I found one of the young talents in Dribble platform. There's a lot of people who are posting their personal website, and usually that would when somebody actually redesigned their personal website, that usually means that they're looking for a job and they're thinking about switching. So I was actually specifically looking for people who are actually recently actually redesigned their website and then, reached out. I would send a cold email out, and usually the responses, if they're interested, they will respond right away. Another thing I've done is actually started like a mentor and mentee relationship. And then out of 15 people I mentored, there's one person that's just like stood out. And then, okay, I'm going to hire this person. And also happened in the past as well. So you kind of have to put yourself self out there or search for those kind of young talents. They don't just come to you directly. Okay. The next question is, what if a designer? Oh, here. Hello.
Hi, nice to meet you. I have a question that's more specific towards like a startup that's currently going through growing pains. Right now, like we don't have a design team, but we're separated. We're starting to be separated based on like the different departments that we're needed in. So, like for example, I'm in marketing, and soon we're gonna have a separate like product team. But I was wondering, in terms of like having designers in different departments, how do we start creating like a design culture?
Oh yeah. Let me ask you: is this person almost like equal level as you are?
So right now I'm a senior. We have one who's a junior, and then at least for the product will be, I believe, more of a senior role as well. So I was just unsure like how we start like still collaborate together when we're placed in different departments.
Yeah. And all three of them are reporting to the head of product.
It's a bit unclear right now because we don't have a head of product yet. We have just a director of marketing, and I believe we're all currently going to report to marketing, but also unsure if the product is going to report to engineering.
Okay.
It's a little
And
fuzzy there.
that is fuzzy. And the founders are product people or marketing?
Founders are product people, engineering people.
Got it. Huh. That is interesting. Wow, that is a fuzzy. This is what I mean. A startup is extremely fuzzy all the time. And the good thing about it is it will keep changing. The structure will keep changing because they end up hiring a PM that's more senior than everyone reports to them, or maybe the founder decided I really want to actually manage designers myself. And
Mhm.
then they start absorbing it. It could happen at any moment. That's the life of a startup. Usually in that case, how do we actually cohesively work together when we're all separated in design in different departments? It's a great question. Usually there's always has to be somebody that kind of steps
Okay.
up that actually like, okay, let's do it together. Let's do it. Um, and that could be you, it could be somebody else. It's like, how about we get together every Friday, just talk about design? It can be very casual. Let's just be friends. And that is
Okay.
the most important thing. Let's just build trust with each other. If the head of marketing or anyone that's like in authority is not doing it, then somebody has to step up from that team. And it's hard because it feels like, it's like you're almost in the spotlight almost. And it can be very uncomfortable, but it could be also a very good practice when you actually become a manager eventually, because that's what you have to do. So you start kind of building the cadences. Okay, let's get together on Friday. Let's have some like happy hour. Let's talk about design. Let's go to this design event together. Or hey, do you mind asking questions is also great, because sometimes when somebody's more great at visual design, you want to go to that person and hey, can you help me out? Usually
Mhm.
help is a great way to get into this like teamwork situation. Let's do it together. Um, so there's a lot of things that you could do. Yeah, that's probably what I would suggest.
Okay,
That's
awesome. Thank
hard.
you.
Right, that's a great question too. That was actually very, very real life, and I've seen that many times in startups as well. Okay, the next question is, how do you analyze if someone doesn't have actual real work in their portfolio? Most of the time, they can't share the work due to confidentiality. Yeah, we noticed, and of course, when I worked at Google, there's nothing that I worked at Google that can put in the portfolio, because things usually take 3-4 years to launch that product feature. Um, this one is hard. That's why, as a designer in any place that in the creative fields, we do have to keep doing stuff outside of work that can be put into portfolio. That requires a bit of work. It really does, actually. And then sometimes you borrow some of the stuff that you did at work, and then you change the name, you change the structure of it, and then you try to put it into a portfolio as if there's something else. You can do a lot of tricks like that. Um, but it is hard. Most of the time, the stuff that we do at work, we can't put in a portfolio, not because confidentiality, because it's really boring. Most real work is really boring. So it's not often really not that great portfolio worthy. That's why sometimes when designers, some of my peers and colleagues go out and start looking for a job, they have completely different things in their portfolio, completely. Something, it can be related to something they did at work, but it's not necessarily the main work. They still put it in there as if, and then put a story around it. So yeah, I mean, a simple answer is you do have to put in some hours and work. It sometimes takes weeks to get a portfolio ready. If you don't have the existing work to show, but most of the time, existing work tends to be pretty boring to, and it's not portfolio worthy. So a lot of designers actually still have to go through this process. Okay. Oh, hello.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Nice to
Um,
meet you, Mike.
Thanks so much for the talk. My question's quite broad, happy to be more specific, but would love to know what advice you'd give to founders who are not from a design background, but who recognize the importance of design when they're first setting up a design function in their company.
Oh, so like advice and how to hire or how to actually start a design function.
Yeah, I mean, both of the above. Like, I guess so we're bringing on board our first designer soon. So thinking about, firstly, what profiles are most helpful, but I think we're in a good position there. And secondly, like what structures and frameworks are going to be valuable for us in terms of creating a good design culture when we're not from design backgrounds.
It's a great question. I think every founder, non-design founder, feels that design is like, it's almost like a mystery to other people. It's I know exactly what you mean too. It's without, non-designers is like, how do I manage this? What's their career ladder look like? How do I make sure that they're feeling supported and then feel like the culture is there? They feel like they can be part of something. It's very difficult. That's why it takes a lot of conscious effort from founders to make that happen. And it's true for me as well as a design founder, for me to really care about a department I'm not in, usually marketing or something that has completely sales, for example. I have to make a conscious effort to. I was like, how do I develop this? And that would mean you would probably the easiest thing is find an advisor that actually harness that a little bit. It's almost like you sending a message out, like I have a design advisor, so I have someone that's going to take care of this culture thing. You have somebody to talk to if you can't talk to me about quality and details about stuff. There's always somebody that you can talk to. You can always that person have a mentor situation with somebody outside so that they can talk about design. Can be a very, very lonely job if that is the only person there that understands design, because they're advocating something and no one's listening.
Yeah, that's what I'm conscious of is, do I have the right terminology, and, like, how do I give good design feedback? Are there any resources I can use to upskill myself to help them feel less lonely? Because this is really important.
Right. It's as long as you're solving a problem together, it's not so much of just like you handing off the work and then you reviewing it. It's much more like we're in this together. Then it feels like a team. So it's almost feel like you're wearing a PM hat and the person is a product designer, and then you're doing something together. Um, that is a way for you to feel like this person's still part of a team. And just the design aspect side, usually senior designer doesn't really require a whole lot of mentorship, but if it's a mid-level or a junior, that tend to require a lot of, like, am I doing something right? That's usually a question that people have in their mind. Am I doing it right? That person, that can be answered by somebody outside of your work, and then something that maybe someone that you can actually um, that you can, like, like partner with outside of it. So that's probably how I do it. If it's a senior person, having another junior designer tends to kind of form a team so they can actually start a design organization together. So that was something that Open Door did in the beginning. When I was there by myself, the CEO was like, okay, I think that we probably need another person to kind of keep that design stuff, because having two people completely changes the dynamic too. It's never lonely, but the hierarchy has to be somewhat clear, because then it's not so much of like, butting heads, but more of like, I'm mentoring you, like I'm learning something from you, let's do this together kind of mentality can be formed there.
Cool. That's super helpful. Thank you.
Of course. It's great that founders care about building a design culture so early on, and then want to do the right thing for designers. And most people feel that way. It's just that not many people know how to do it. It's very cool. Okay, the next question is for designers early in their careers. How much weight do you put on your portfolio versus how they explain their approach to problem solving? Um, early is usually you want to show as much of hard skills you have. That's usually how approach to problem solving is important once you pass the wildness of your portfolio. So you do have to invest quite a bit of that final product, final ending of your product, the final, the artifacts, the UI of it. So what I suggest most people to do is to work on the final UI and then make sure that thing is shiny and beautiful, and then go back and write their approach to problem solving. But don't spend too much time on it. Just make sure you just have some kind of explanation, and then maybe there's some wireframes that you kind of insert. This is what most people designers do. It's just that we don't talk about it. We tend to kind of design the final stuff first, and then we go back and write the process. And that seems to be a much faster way of doing things, because there are times you get stuck in building that final product, and then you move on to another problem, and then which actually sometimes moving on to another problem can actually help that, you know build that really amazing portfolio faster. Okay, so the next question is, if you had the choice, would you build a team of general? Oh, I think I already answered this. Cool. What if a designer is not providing you the quality bar you set? Oh, it's a great question. Yeah, it's just like sometimes it just takes a bit of time. You hire someone and then you're expecting a certain quality bar, but maybe it takes about 18 months for that person to get to that level. Then it's really, really hard. Then, as a founder, can you afford another designer that can up the bar? Or is this person like, providing any value in other places? So that's a question you kind of have to answer as a founder, is like, can I afford two designers? Or can this person be something else? Can this person be good at coding or doing something else that's other than design? If the answer is no, then the answer is you have to do the hard thing, which is actually letting the person go and try to hire somebody that would actually meet the bar. That's why for designers, I always tell founders to hire very slow. Try different freelancers. Try maybe two or three ones, and then understand what the bar that you're looking for, and then look for a full-time designer, because it only takes one designer for 10 engineers. There's very, very few designers that's needed in the company, especially when your company's small. So you want to hire the right person, and that's true for PM as well. Okay, the next question. Oh, that's great.
I was just going to say, shall we take one or two more questions?
Yeah, I think we can do. Let's see. We can do two more questions.
Perfect.
Great. All right. So, two more questions. How do we manage stress among team members? Um, How do you manage stress amongst your team members? Stress level goes up and down constantly, especially if you're a brand design team. Brand design team sees a stress that no other stress I've ever seen. And like product designers have a slightly easier. I think it's just general, like the product development is a little slower than marketing. But it's the marketing and the product designers, there's a lot of stress, of course, because constantly go go go. How do you manage stress as a head of design? I think that there's no right or wrong answers to this. you do have to try. I mean, it's not there's no right or wrong answer. You can't like implement suddenly like 4-day week. It's not like you are in control of anything like that. But it's you do have to, when somebody's working really hard, you do have to kind of make sure that they slow down a bit, you know, and then you give them a heads up. You're working really hard right now. You probably will need a break after this. So, and then make sure that you take tons of break. And then that way you can actually manage a little bit of stress that way, people stress. But again, I'm still struggling how to manage my own stress and how to manage people's stress. I don't know if that's any right or wrong answers to this. I wish I knew a good answer, and I wish I have an answer for this. All right, the last question. For someone looking to hire designers, where do you recommend you find candidates? There are a lot of platforms out there, and then many seem to place focus on quantity of applicants over quality. Yeah, I know it's hard. Like I said, it's designers are the company doesn't need, I mean, the team doesn't need that many not like engineers. Engineers, so the ratio usually is of 1 to 5, 6. So engineers you could hire a lot and then they will cover all those spots and all the spaces, whereas you only need one really great designer sometimes. And how do you find this like perfect person? Well, there's a lot of brute force. Recruiting requires a lot of brute forcing. So that would mean you go to LinkedIn and then fire emails constantly. What all that stuff. Like you have a persona in your mind, and then you find exactly that kind of persona. Find the right filters for it, and then you just kind of should cold emails. Most of the time you do the cold emails and you do phone calls, and then some people just kind of fall out, you know, through that process, and then some people just stuck around, and then it goes to the next stage, and then you really like that person, you really want to work with that person, and that's usually how, you know, how to do this stuff. So it's like top funnel. You want to increase a top funnel first, know exactly who you're looking for, and then just shoot cold emails, and then you narrow it down with the, you know, phone calls, and then you narrow it down with, you know, on-site interviews, and do a little more, maybe do a little bit of work together, if it's not like a 2-week project or 1-week project like that, and then you can probably understand very quickly if that person's going to work out. Great.
Questions, but I know that there are many more, which leads me to believe that this has been an extremely successful event that we should do again. Thank you for giving us an hour of your time to teach us about how to build successful design teams for founders and managers. Super informative.
Yeah, this has been super fun. I love these questions. I wish I had more time to answer these things. But yeah, this has been really amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Jessica is part of our 16-week product design course here at Dribble as well. She does a live Q&A all around career prep. So if you want to learn more from Jessica, check out our 16-week product design course if you are a designer and want to get prepared for your career. Big thank you again to Jessica, and thank you everyone for coming here. Thank you for giving up your time to learn with Dribble. It's been super fun to have you. Thank you for engaging in the chat and all your really thoughtful and thought-provoking questions. I'm going to send an email out with the recording of this session along with Jessica's slides that she shared at the beginning of this. So watch out for that, and always visit dribble.com/learn to look at upcoming workshops that we have. And we will see you soon.